Well, good morning. Somebody pointed at me. Preachers always try to take that as a positive sign or anything else that happens, So I'll take that just to mean it's time to start rather than anything else. Well, it's really good to be with you today. I wanted to just follow up on one of the announcements that Callista made earlier about the Hill Country flood relief. Our Bishop Cynthia Harvey, who is right up the street, just a block from us here, 2 blocks from us, is the Bishop of the Texas Conference, which is of the United Methodist Church, which is the eastern slice of Texas. But in the shuffling around after our split, she is now Bishop of 2 conferences, and she is also the Bishop of the Rio, Texas Conference, where the flood happened. So she has and that's her home conference. She grew up over there. So she has a very personal interest in what's happening there and all the relief work. So thank you for your contribution. What a tragic thing to have happened, and to be able to respond and help people in this time of need is a wonderful thing. So thank you for your participation in that. And I just wanted you to know that personal connection. Our Bishop, Bishop Harvey, who worships with us quite often, is also the Bishop of that conference and is looking very carefully into the United Methodist response in that particular area. It's her home and her area now where she's the presiding bishop. So thanks again for your support. I'm glad to be here. Bill and Sherry and, of course, Jeff McDonald and all the choir and about 130 other people are in Lincoln, England today. And they'll be singing a week's worth of evensong and other such things while they're there. And I don't know if any of them happen to be watching today, but if they are, hello, we're glad you're here. And whoever else is out there watching this day, we're glad you chose to be a part of things. There won't be any magic tricks today. Who can do everything Bill does? But when I speak before you, I usually do something from the Bible. I can do other things, but I'm more comfortable in the Bible, and I try to take a little bit of a fresh approach and kind of look at it with some new eyes and help you too. So hopefully we can do that today. But I want to say how much I appreciate what Bill does in here. He just is on the cutting edge all the time. Always reads, always studies, always prepared, always helping you to engage in an appropriate faith for the 21st century, for the times in which we live. Not the 19th century, where some people seem to be stuck, or even further back, but trying to find faith in a difficult time in our nation and in our world, and walking that kind of, if you can think about Bill as being middle ground, walking that middle ground between people who've given up on the faith and those who are stuck in the past, and trying to find new ways of making the faith real today for the circumstances in which we find ourselves. I appreciate so much him doing that. It is a really important part of the ministry of this church. Your participation as the class is a very important part of the ministry of this church too. Those people who are willing to walk that journey and try to find an appropriate faith for the times in which we live. So thank you for all you do. Thank you for caring for one another and others beyond your class. So I appreciate everything that this class stands for. I'm going to be with you 2 Sundays, this Sunday and the next Sunday. And I'm going to, I titled this, Jesus' First Sermon. That's a little bit of a misnomer, but it worked for a kind of a working title for something for us to look at while we're here today. And I'm going to do a good bit of background today. It's much too long to delve into every aspect because it's 3 chapters long, but I'm just going to I'm going to do the Beatitudes, hopefully get to that today, and then some of the highlights from the rest of the Sermon on the Mount. It is found in Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7. So it's a long passage. And I just wanted to give you some background today and begin to look at some of those early passages that at least Matthew and those who put Matthew's gospel together have assembled as the first sermon of Jesus. Now, whether Jesus said all of this at one time in one setting, we don't know that, but it's not included in any of the other gospels in this form. But we know he said these things at some point, and probably those who put together the Gospel of Matthew assembled them and made them into one sermon. It's about 20 minutes long, so it makes a good sermon. That's about a good sermon length. People can still stand a 20-minute sermon these days. We don't know for sure who wrote the Gospel of Matthew. If you look at the best biblical scholarship, they will tell you that the author of the Gospel of Matthew is anonymous. That is the one that kind of began the process of putting it together. Sometime in the latter third of the first century, maybe 70-ish or somewhere along in there, is where we think this gospel came together. And whoever did this drew from, we think, the apostle, the disciple, Matthew, some of the stories and recollections that he had about Jesus, and other sources as well, including the Gospel of Mark, which was written earlier. So these are just background information that provides some insight as to how we got the Bible as we have it today. It's a complicated process, and just keep that in mind. So when I say Matthew, I'm talking about Matthew's Gospel as we've come to call it, even though there were others involved in putting it together. It probably got Matthew's name attached to it sometime in the 2nd century. He was an apostle. It became important early on for the biblical literature to have apostolic authorship. So that's probably when Matthew's name was attached to it, and he did contribute to it. Didn't probably write every aspect of it, but it has stuck, and that's what we call it today. So the Gospel of Matthew. It is a collection of sayings that Jesus probably said at some point, and that they have shaped in this gospel into one long sermon. Now, the setting is in Galilee. If you know a little bit about what we call the Holy Land, it's in 3 sections: Galilee in the north, Samaria, where Samaritans lived, in the center, and Judea in the south, which was where Jerusalem was. That's where the religious people lived and kind of ran the temple and other such things. So you have Galilee, a little more intercultural, Samaritans, Samaria, where the Samaritans lived, and then Jerusalem and Judea, where the more religious people lived, and you had the religious sects there that kind of ran things. So Jesus did most of his ministry in the Galilee area and around before he finally ended up in Jerusalem. And in that area of Galilee is Israel is bounded, I'm sure you know this, but maybe as a review, is bounded by the Mediterranean Sea on the one hand, the Jordan River on the other hand. And the Jordan River comes out of the mountains above it, feeds the Sea of Galilee, and then the Sea of Galilee is a beautiful lake, and it trickles on down into the Dead Sea, and the Dead Sea is more salty than the ocean, and nothing lives in the Dead Sea, and the water does not emerge from the Dead Sea. The Jordan River dies in the Dead Sea. But those are the boundaries for Israel in that day and time, and in our time today as well. And so in Galilee, there's a beautiful setting of a mountain that is up the hillside. We call it a mountain. It's not mountains like you think of in Colorado or somewhere, but it's a higher place. And I've been there, and it's very green and beautiful, and it overlooks the whole valley there of the Sea of Galilee. It's just a beautiful spot. And that is the traditional spot where it is attributed that Jesus gave an address, as his first kind of coming out, if you will. Just as a reminder, a little bit more of the background, Matthew's gospel almost contains, it contains very little birth story. Most of that is in Luke's gospel. The angels and the shepherds and the annunciation to Mary and all of that is in Luke's gospel. It's the only place you find it in the Bible. In Matthew's gospel, the angel speaks to Joseph. And there's a very little about the birth of Jesus, just kind of really one sentence. She had a baby and wrapped him in clothes. And so it is, but you have that brief birth story about Jesus. Then what is added in Matthew's gospel that is not in anywhere else in the Bible, Luke's gospel or anywhere else, is the coming of the wise men. So the magi, the astrologers, astronomers, the astrologists, whatever you want to call them, wise men come to view the birth, and that's the only place you find it is in Matthew's gospel. The other thing that I think is significant to note is that Herod, because of the wise men coming, according to Matthew's gospel, is afraid that a new king is arising that would threaten his reign. That may sound familiar. Kings are usually kind of paranoid about anyone that would threaten their reign. And so you remember the story. He looks for Jesus, this new king, whoever it is, to take his life. Can't find him, and decides that he will kill all the young male children in the area in which Jesus was born. So that is referred to in the Gospel of Matthew, you probably know this term, as the slaughter of the innocents. Now, what I think is significant about that is that the Holy Family, Mary, Joseph, Jesus, whoever else, gets word about the intentions of Herod, and they flee. They go to Egypt to escape the purge, which incidentally and significantly makes them refugees. They were the Holy Family was a refugee family that fled their home place out of fear, not unlike what refugees still do today, trying to find a better place and a safer place to live. So in the background of Jesus' experience is that experience of being a refugee himself, and finally have an opportunity to coming back to Galilee when the threat was over and they settle in the Nazareth area, and he is raised in that area. Now, we don't know anything basically about Jesus' life for the first 30 years. There's just nothing there. We have that little story fleeing to Egypt, but we don't know anything about it. It just says they went. And then they come back. And the very next thing that happens in the Gospel of Matthew is that when they settle into Nazareth and they're there, the very next, it says that, and then the next thing that happens is we jump to John the Baptist. And that would be a good 25 years or more, however old Jesus was when they returned from Egypt. If he was 4 or 5, something like that. And so we jump all those years, and the next thing that happens in the 4th chapter of Matthew is that you find John the Baptist out in the wilderness, in the Jordan River, baptizing people for repentance. And Jesus up and goes. That's the first thing we hear about Jesus as an adult. He goes to be baptized by John in the Jordan River. Galilee again, Samaria here. And the place of the baptism would have probably been just north of the Dead Sea in the Jordan River there. So he makes that journey and goes there. And what it says is that there were religious people coming from Jerusalem, Pharisees and Sadducees and others, to be baptized by John at the same time. So Jesus had some early exposure, though he lived in Galilee. He had some early exposure, and he would have known about them, to some of the religious people that kind of ran things back then. And I think this is significant. You basically had four sects in Judaism at the time. You probably could count more, but you had Pharisees who were strict keepers of the law. You had Sadducees who were keepers of the law, but not so strict. They were willing to kind of compromise with the culture and make some deals if they needed to. And then you had the Zealots. You know, we still use that word today, and that's where it came from. They were the ones that were ready to overthrow the Romans and take back their country. And then you had the Essenes, who lived out there very close to where John the Baptist was baptizing people, Qumran community, right next to the Dead Sea. In fact, there's a lot of speculation that John the Baptist may have been a part of the Essene sect. Now, all this becomes background as Jesus begins that process of trying to identify his understanding of his calling and of who he is. So he's got that experience of a refugee. He's got, as we know from some sources, the experience of growing up in a carpenter's house. And he's got that experience now of going into the wilderness to be baptized, where all the other religious leaders have come. And he's going to define himself over and against those people. And he's going to do it in this first sermon that we have, and indeed through the rest of his ministry. So just to continue on with I'm really good at background. I know I give too much background, but I'm a little bit of a historian, and I just think it helps you understand the particular context if you understand the larger context. So that's what we're doing today. The very next thing that Jesus does after he's baptized is that wilderness area is between him and his home. So he goes into the wilderness, 40 days and 40 nights, faces the temptations. It's another lesson to talk about all of that. But I would understand that as a continuation of his development, of his self-understanding of who he is. So he's got all of these things kind of ruminating in his person about what kind of self-understanding he is to have. He's got that, he's born a Jew, flees to Egypt, becomes a refugee, comes back, grows up in a carpenter's family, baptized by John in the Jordan River with other religious leaders, I'll say. He was not a religious leader at the time. The strict law keepers and the more passionate people from Jerusalem coming out. He's got that time in the wilderness where he's thinking about who he will be. And so he finally then makes his way back from the wilderness, back up into Galilee, calls a few disciples early on, does a healing or two. And then the very next thing that happens is, according to Matthew's gospel, he makes his way up that mountain and offers his first sermon. So it comes early in his ministry, according to Matthew's gospel, and it comes with all of those influences in his life as he's trying to understand who he is and what he will say to those who've gathered. And you might say, well, he knew who he was. I'd say yes and no. I mean, he certainly knew he had a special calling, but there was a particular way in which he would live out that calling, which I think was a matter of some determination on his part. At least that would be my theology about that. So here we go. All that is a background. By the way, just a couple of things about the Sermon on the Mount here. This is not background. This is just a personal levity here to kind of take a little detour. When I was in college, we were given an assignment to memorize a speech and give it in class. I memorized the Sermon on the Mount. I couldn't do it today, I don't think, but there is a certain flow to it. And it was about 20 minutes, and I memorized it and got through it and said it in class, and that was my assignment. So that's what I did. So I've memorized the Sermon on the Mount, and it's been significant to me for a lot of years now. One other just personal deviation here, and that is a few years ago, I went with an interfaith group to Israel. We had Jews, Christians, and Muslims together visiting the Holy Land. And while we were there, we talked with various groups that represented each of the constituencies which we represented. It was a very significant trip. I still cherish it. My children said, Dad, why are you going to the Holy Land? And I said, I'm going to bring peace to the Middle East. Didn't quite work out that way. I don't know if anything ever will. But it was nevertheless, hope we built a bridge or two, at least amongst the people that went, and some bridges over there. But while I was there, in the trip together, we went up to the Mount of Beatitudes, as it's called, that mountain that overlooks the Sea of Galilee, where tradition has it that Jesus offered his first sermon. And they asked me if I would read. And I couldn't. That's been a long time. Didn't have it memorized. They asked me if I would read some of the Sermon on the Mount. And I started with the Beatitudes and read that and some other things in it. As I was reading, it started raining, and people were getting wet. My Bible was getting wet, and I didn't have an umbrella. And out of kind of nowhere, Rabbi David Rosen, who is a Rabbi Emeritus, I'm Emeritus now, at Congregation Beth Yeshurun over here, and he appeared with an umbrella and held it over my head so I could continue reading. It's always been a significant, meaningful event for me, symbolic in some ways. From our differences, we can nevertheless offer protection from the storm from time to time for each other, as you've done for your offerings and as we do, in each other's lives from time to time. But I never read these without thinking about how significant that was. So we've got Jesus then up at the top of the mountain of the Mount of Beatitudes, and let me see how far off my notes I've gotten here. Yeah, and Jesus begins what is called the Sermon on the Mount. Now, let's see. I want you to read that first sentence there. It says, my translation may be a little different. If you can see it, if you're not, I'll read it. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak and taught them, saying. So that is the introduction of the sermon that he's about to give. Now, it's interesting that that's the way Matthew tells the story, and it's the way he recalls what happened that day and other people who put this together. Jesus goes up the mountain and sits down, probably on a rock, in order to teach. That would have been the traditional way that rabbis taught. So he's going to be very traditional about this and kind of sees Jesus as a new Moses, as another rabbi that's coming to teach people. Now, I've referred a little bit to Luke's gospel. It's kind of the best one to kind of bounce off together between Matthew and Luke. I did a little bit about the birth differences. Matthew begins it this way, but Luke treats some of the same material. I'm not going to get to the differences today, but I might. But I think I'll get there next week. Depends on how much, how much more background material I give, I guess. Luke presents some of the same material that Jesus gave according to Matthew in the Sermon on the Mount in what we call, and some of you will know this, I see some clergy out there, I know that will know this, that we call the Sermon on the Plain. Not on the mountain, but on the plain. And just to show you a different understanding of what is remembered about who Jesus was, instead of going up the mountain, looking out on people, sitting down like a rabbi does to teach, in Luke's version of the Sermon on the Plain, he says very clearly, he came down the mountain and stood among them. That's a really different image, isn't it? One presenting kind of a traditional rabbi with respect, doing what he should be doing, and one coming down from the mountain. It's like some preachers today, instead of preaching from the pulpit, they come down and just stand on the level plane with everybody. I don't like that as much myself personally, but a lot of people do it. It's a way of connecting with people. I understand why they do it. And that's how Luke understands what Jesus did. And he treats the same material, in some cases, in very different ways from that different perspective. That Jesus is not the rabbi sitting where we can all look at him. He is one of us in Luke's gospel, and he just stands around with us and kind of talks to us. So a little different image, and as we go through this, I will point out some of the differences between what Luke recalls about how Jesus gave primarily the Beatitudes and how Matthew presents them. So just kind of keep that in mind as we get to it. By the way, here's another little aside, funny story. Charles Allen was a longtime pastor of First Methodist Church, First United Methodist Church, and First Methodist Church, I guess, before that. And he made a trip to the Holy Land one year, went on the same Mount of Beatitudes that I did, and lo and behold, he brings back this big rock all the way from the Holy Land to Houston, Texas, and somehow he set it on the altar of the church at First United Methodist Church right down here. And if you knew Charles Allen at all, this would be so in keeping with him, big Georgia accent. And he said, now, the gospel says when Jesus taught the Sermon on the Mount, he sat on a rock. And we don't know for sure that that's not the rock. He was a great preacher and a great sense of humor, and I guess we don't know for sure. There's a lot of things we don't know for sure. But at any rate, Jesus then begins to speak these words according to Matthew's gospel. I thought, in one sense, it's going to sound strange to say, but I'll have to explain it. Jesus made the same mistake, that doesn't sound right, does it, that most of us make when we preach our first sermon, David. And that is, we try to put too much into it, And you don't know much, not Jesus, but we don't know enough to say, so maybe that's what I'm doing today. I don't know. But there's a lot in the Sermon on the Mount. So I'm just going to hit the highlights and try to get through the Beatitudes. Beatitude is what we call the blessed. the blessed. I try to use the word blessed instead of blessed. My mother didn't know too many curse words. My daddy did. But blessed was almost a curse word for her. You know, you understand that? She would say of somebody, he never worked a blessed day in his life, or something like that. So instead of saying blessed, I tend to want to say blessed. So the blessings that are given in the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. And the word beatitude comes from the Latin word beatus, which means blessed or happy. So these words of Jesus are the beatitudes or the blessings or the be happy. Happy doesn't quite have the oomph, I think, as the word blessing does. But at any rate, that's kind of what it means in the literal Latin, I think. So here we are then at the beginning of Jesus' first sermon. And if you can read that, follow along. Otherwise, I'm just going to read all of them. And then I'm going to comment on a couple of them as we have time. Here we go. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And there's one more I think I didn't add there. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. So, Jesus' opening words, his first public statement to people who had gathered on the crowd that day, was to offer blessings to people in all kinds of life's circumstances. So, one of the things that he had discerned in that background experience of being a refugee, of living in a carpenter's house, of being out in the wilderness to be baptized in the river and seeing the religious folk around him, and of spending time in the desert himself, all of those experiences, rubbing elbows with those religious groups, had led him to offer his first word as a blessing to the people who gathered that day. Now, I want to just look at some of these as we have time, one at a time here. All of them have a little twist. Most of them have a little twist to them. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Well, that's very interesting, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. I think that says, blessed are those that are not all that religious. You think? Blessed are those who are not sure about everything. Blessed are those who are struggling along the way but hadn't quite found it yet. Blessed are the poor in spirit. It's an interesting phrase. That's the first word he says. Blessed are the poor in spirit. And maybe that experience at the baptism of seeing all those religious folk, you know how religious folk can act. Seeing all those religious folk come out there had helped Jesus form in his mind that that maybe wasn't his crowd. And so his first word, introductions and sermons are very important, and his first word in his first sermon was, "Blessed are the poor in spirit," those that don't have it all figured out, those that maybe feel a little bit spiritual, but not as much as they'd like to be and not as much as they know how to be. And it's the very first word that Jesus shares. I just think that is a significant thing. Maybe that touches some of you in this class. I think it touches me from time to time. The poor in spirit. And what he says about that is, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. That's what the kind of people God's looking for, in effect. Now, I think what I might do now is contrast it. I wasn't sure if I was going to do this today or not, but I think I will. Contrast it with how Luke presents what Jesus said in this particular beatitude. And some of you will know that. Blessed are the poor in spirit. The rabbi sitting on the rock teaching people. Luke's Jesus, coming down from the mountain on the plain, standing around talking to people, says, blessed are the poor. Blessed are the poor, not the poor in spirit. So it kind of socializes it a little bit and makes it have a little more. I think both these have a bite to them, but it has a different kind of bite to it. It's almost like it's one of those social justice kind of statements of Jesus. One is a little more spiritual, but spiritual in a way that has integrity, the poor in spirit. And the other is, how shall we respond to those who are hungry around us? Blessed are those who are poor. Blessed are those who don't have enough. Blessed, I said blessed, didn't I? Old habits. Blessed are those who are poor, not poor in spirit. That's the way Luke remembers what Jesus said in that early sermon. Now, you can decide which one of those is more significant for you, but I think they both are. I think to hear Jesus say, poor in spirit, that is not having everything quite together yet, and also then addressing those who are among us who are poor, that somehow they are blessed too. That the poor are blessed among us. Now, and that was pretty countercultural at the time, because as we almost still do today, people tend to think that if a person is poor, it's their own fault. You know, they didn't do some things along the way that they could have done. They missed some opportunities. They abused chances in life. And so it's a radical statement, whichever one you look at, poor in spirit or poor, that comes from Jesus at the very beginning, that both of which are countercultural. You would not expect a preacher to say, you know, if you don't have a very good spiritual life, it's okay. And you would not expect at the time to say poor people are blessed. They're not blessed today in any way that we can understand. You know, I don't know what we do with the homeless population. As I understand it, President Trump has offered a statement that we're supposed to pick up all the homeless people and not let them sleep on the sidewalks. I have sympathies for that. I mean, you know, we got it, but you know, I don't know what we do when we pick them up. It's not an easy solution, is it? And somehow, if you can think who the poor are, if that's your image, and that Jesus says about that, they are blessed. And maybe they're blessed because they have no one else to depend on but God. I don't know what he may have meant by that, but maybe that's what he meant. So you've got a statement there in the first word from Jesus, treated differently in the two Gospels, each of which has their own significance. The poor in spirit or the poor. So, well, let me continue with some of the others here. And I'm not going to spend as much time on some of them. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Now, that's a pretty straightforward statement. And I think it gives us the opportunity to add to whatever comfort God is able to provide in time of grief, our own way of responding to people who mourn. Sometimes we are the ones who provide the comfort in a situation of grief. In the recent tragedy in the Hill Country, or in, I don't know how you begin to even approach what's going on in Gaza today, or in any other of the extreme tragedies in life, even just the loss of a loved one personally, but all of the other things that are larger than that. For you, that's very large, but for a situation in which lots of people are involved, Jesus said, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." And I think he means by God's own presence, but I think he also means by what we are able to do for those among us who mourn, not only in a personal circumstance, certainly that, death of a loved one, but in the larger sense of the mourning about our world. Mourning about the state of the conditions in which we as a world live, and especially how some people live these days. Mourning over those who are in basically concentration camps as refugees, as immigrants. Mourning over what's happening in Gaza. Mourning what's happening in some places in Africa today. All of those circumstances in life. So I would take this to mean certainly a personal sense, but beyond that as well. That those who mourn in those circumstances in life that we find so difficult to get our hands around, they will be comforted by how you and I respond. So that's the way I would take that particular beatitude of Jesus. And then I don't know what to make of the next one. Let's see what time it is. I got a little more time. Tell me in what sense this is true. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Now, nothing about that seems logical, does it? Everything tells us that the aggressive, those that seek to acquire more and more, are the ones that rule the earth, and the ones that are in control of everything that happens. And so, Jesus didn't offer any commentary. Maybe he left it for us to decide what that means, but he just offers this extremely counterintuitive statement. The meek will inherit the earth. And I have to tell you, I believe that. Now, when the Jewish people were persecuted mercilessly following the Maccabean revolt, and when they were put to death and sacrificed the pig on the altar and all kinds of things like that, the forces did, and they just suffered greatly for their faith. At the time, the belief in an afterlife in Judaism was not strong. We're not sure it existed. There was kind of a Sheol where everybody went, just where you slept. And the rabbis who helped people work through that intense time of persecution determined that it may take longer than this life for justice to happen. And they began to entertain the possibility, interestingly enough, of resurrection, of life after life here. Because it may take longer than this life for justice to play out. And I don't know if that's exactly how I believe this one. The meek will inherit the earth. But if there is a God of justice, I do believe at some point, when all the dust settles, the meek will inherit the earth. That's what Jesus said. So I take that to be a counterintuitive statement, but a statement of hope as well. That, like the blessed are those who mourn, we're to participate in it. We are to help bring about that day when the powerful and corrupt do not run everything. Blessed are the meek, they will inherit the earth. So it's a very, very powerful statement, I think. I'm just going to read this next one, and we're going to start there next week because this is another good one to contrast with Luke's gospel. And I don't have time to do it today, but I'm going to start here next week. This is what Matthew says, or Jesus in Matthew's gospel. Catch the difference, and you probably can determine where this is going. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. So when Luke remembers how Jesus said that, how would he remember it? Blessed are the hungry. Yeah. Now, they both have a punch to it, but just like it's blessed are the poor, it's blessed are the hungry. In Matthew, it's blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Now, here's where we're going to start next week. All those early experiences of Jesus, especially with those religious people coming out to be baptized, having their own sense of what's righteous, the righteousness that Jesus comes to in Matthew's gospel, I think, is a prophetic righteousness. And that's where I'm going to start next week. And Luke just says, blessed are the hungry. So we'll start on that particular beatitude next week and kind of look at how both those have significance. Try to get through the rest of the beatitudes and then just look at some of the other highlights in Jesus' first sermon. Jesus' first sermon began with declaring people blessed in all of life's circumstances. I hope you see yourself blessed in that way, and that you see all those other people that we share this planet with as blessed people as well, and that you live your life in such a way that they feel that. Thank you.